Welcome everyone. We're going live today. I'm Dr Edwar, the Healing Vet, and we've got another amazing holistic veterinarian, Dr Peter Dobias, we're going to have a lovely conversation today. Every now and then we get together and have a conversation live here on Facebook and YouTube so that we can talk about holistic pet wellness and how best to give your pets the best possible life, hopefully without having to use terrible toxic things that most of veterinary science uses. How are you today, Peter? And how's your dog, Jax?
I am amazing, amazing. Thank you, Edward. Thanks for having me here. I'm great, mainly because I appreciate simple things like having power in the house. This morning I woke up and there was no power, and we are kind of waiting to see what would happen, whether I'll be able to come on or not. And
Ah,
when it comes to my dog Pax, he's actually just snoozing here. I took him for a walk with my very good friend, a chiropractor,
uh-huh.
and I had a lot of opportunity to actually observe some dog behavior. And I know that you are keen on talking about dog behavior and
Yeah.
anxiety. And I was like served this whole bunch of dogs this morning just on the walk where I could see actually what they were doing and how different behavior is, not only in different regions of the same city, but also in different countries. So I've had the opportunity to actually observe what goes on in three different places. And it's really interesting, such an interesting topic. And I'm not an expert on dog behavior per se. I'm not board certified behaviorist, but
Mm-hmm.
after 30 years, I guess you get to know dogs really well. Plus, I have had an interest in dog behavior because of homeopathy, because
Mm-hmm.
the behavior of our dogs actually reflects in the physical disease, and that's what we've been taught in homeopathy. So I put a lot of emphasis on behavior in general as well.
Okay, so then in just a second I'll get you to talk a little bit about the differences you see in behaviour in European dogs and Canadian dogs. But just before we do that, I just want to say to everyone, I did an interview yesterday and we had technical issues and it dropped out. So if it drops out, we will come back. But hopefully the internet will play the game today and technology will support us rather than causing us problems. But yeah, so what differences do you notice? Because I'm a bit fascinated by that.
Oh my goodness. I've lived in Canada for 30 years, and I'm pretty much used to the way dogs behave here. But what I started to notice, because I now am being drawn with my heart and soul back to Europe and spending time with my family and friends there, I've noticed that I actually am going to summarize that the European dogs. Oh, well, there's differences between different countries, and I come originally from the Czech Republic, which has now become, a very well-developed country,
Mm-hmm.
and dogs have a very important position there. They are everywhere, and what I noticed that dogs actually get an opportunity to interact with each other. And also, dog lovers know when their dog is not actually to socialize with other dogs. So you can be pretty sure that most of the dogs that you run into in parks and so on will be well socialized and they will have a degree of ease, almost like if you have a bunch of school kids and they know how to play together,
Yeah.
the dogs are like that too. And when you let dogs do that, they seem to be actually really comfortable and they don't have these crazy, I call them flip outs on the leash, right? When they start being anxious or aggressive or start reacting because they are not given enough opportunity to actually say hello. So in the Czech Republic, there is because I've spent quite a bit of time there this year, all the parks are pretty much off leash.
Mm-hmm.
And even the city, I just recorded a little walk with packs around the city just about 2 weeks ago, and I was reviewing it and noticed that about 9 out of the 10 dogs that I run on the walk into were off leash
Mm-hmm.
in a city. meaning it can be in parks, it can be on streets, and they're capable of navigating the traffic, the sidewalks, they're reliable, and so on. And the anxiety on the leash doesn't happen because most dogs are off leash. And when they're on leash, they're already dealing with other dogs off leash. So the body language is very clear. They can sniff, they get an opportunity to say hello. Mm-hmm. And transferring it back to Canada, this morning I actually was walking with my very good friend who is an animal chiropractor, a very good chiropractor. So Pax and I usually go for a little adjustment and tune-up. And I had Pax off leash, and I noticed that out of the X number of dogs, probably 12 or a dozen of dogs that we run into, all of them were on leash, even though there were no signs on leash or off leash. And every time my dog approached another dog, I could see my friend kind of like holding her breath. And I said, "What's going on?" Well, she goes, "Well, people are not really used to other dogs approaching their dogs." And many of these dogs actually were kind of like a little on an edge, right? Like they were not really comfortable with Pax coming to them. So it became, the whole walk became a little less comfortable. And I do have a feeling that when our dogs are given an opportunity to socialize with other dogs and do what dogs would do, that means sniff and say hi and wag their tails, that their anxiety drops right down. It's almost like you're thrown in a room full of people and you cannot say hello to anyone, right? Like you cannot shake hands, you cannot really establish some sort of dynamic and so on. And I'd like to take it one step further, remembering the time when I went to Thailand in, maybe 10, 15 years ago. And I was just blown away how well dogs navigated traffic. Cars, people, bikes, totally capable of navigating safely the traffic and the environment. Now imagine the dogs from Canada being let go if they're not off leash at all. And even in Prague, those dogs are probably not being on their own and independent, right? So the interesting part is that dogs seem to have much better ability to navigate the world than we give them credit for.
Yeah.
And they seem to be less anxious when we give them the space. So I love to, if there's one thing that I'd like people to remember from today is there can be order without control. People can have their dogs off leash and they will have a certain degree of common sense about how dogs will behave and whether they should have them off leash or not. And of course, some things happen, right? Accidents happen in human world and canine world. But I do not think that restricting our dogs will actually lead to better behavior. It actually is the opposite. It's almost like, if someone says, "Don't do this," like we're going to do exact opposite.
Yeah.
If dogs are not allowed to be free, they will act out. And also the leash is kind of an extension of anxiety to the humans. Like if humans are anxious, the leash is like an antenna, right? In a way.
Yeah. I think that's really interesting what you're talking about, because I remember when I went to Bali, they have a lot of street dogs there. There's dogs everywhere in the street. These dogs are just roaming free, right? There's packs and packs of them, and they all interact. They're all perfectly happy. I never saw any kind of aggression between any street dogs when I was there at all. I got barked at by a lot of them, especially if you're going past at night. At night, there was a lot of barking everywhere because the dogs would be telling everyone, "Oh, someone's coming past." But I also saw some interesting research that they did in Bali where they compared the dogs that were just roaming at liberty on the streets with dogs that expats from other Europe, Australia, Europe, wherever, the UK, that were living in Bali had adopted a street dog and taken them and then started treating them like they do in their countries of origin, so keeping them in the yard, confining them. And they found higher levels of anxiety and reactivity in the dogs that were restricted in this way compared to the street dogs. So that
I'm not surprised at all.
Yeah, that would tend to support your idea. And the other thing from listening to you talking about the dogs in Czech Republic and the Bali dogs, well, their whole socialisation periods, they would have been having freedom to interact with other dogs in a healthy way too, yeah, which I think in our society, I get a lot of people come into the clinic with their puppy and they say, you know, yeah, and I shouldn't even let it walk on the grass, right, until it's 16 weeks old. I should just have it go into the toilet on a little pad in the home, yeah? I go, no, that's the worst thing you could possibly do for your puppy. You know, so there's a real fear around disease and stuff in puppies too, and I think that leads to the high levels of neurotic behaviours and anxiety and all that sort of thing that we see, and that I certainly see a lot of, especially with COVID puppies, because all the humans were locked up too, right, while they had these puppies.
You know, I think that you're right on. The early socialization is super important, even before these puppies get to us, like how they're handled. There are a lot of dogs nowadays that are bred just for the purpose of being sold. And that's one of the serious problems, that they're not socialized, they're not handled, they're in stressful environments, their mothers are stressed. We know that stress and emotions get actually imprinted on the DNA to a degree, right? Trauma and so on can actually be really transferred from one generation to another through DNA changes and so on. I find that, or I believe that we as a profession have done a huge disservice to the dog population by restricting them from socializing with other dogs. There's a misperception that dogs are unprotected and they shouldn't be socializing with other dogs. And I have developed this protocol that has worked really well, and I have to touch wood, I've never had it fail, and dogs never gotten sick. But what I really trust and rely on is the maternal antibodies and the presence of maternal antibodies. If I measure the antibodies at the age of 8 and 12 weeks, I know where the dogs are, whether they're protected, let's say for distemper or parvo. And then when I see that their antibodies are at sufficient level, I like to socialize them. I like to start socializing them as early as 8 weeks or 12 weeks. And we know that these antibodies will disappear. But my general experience is that they are protected by the maternal antibodies, and then the immune system develops their own. So they have their own antibodies that will protect them. So there is really, it's the most dangerous part is actually to leave puppies away and apart from older dogs when they're protected by the maternal antibodies. And the other dangerous part is that we give vaccines too early and they actually neutralize the maternal antibodies. They wipe them out. And that's how our dogs actually become less protected. I have a whole protocol on my website that actually describes how to achieve immunity safely without excessive vaccination, but with some vaccines if they're needed. But my dog Pax actually has never had distemper and parvo vaccine, and he has normal protective levels of antibodies against parvo and distemper, because I actually let him socialize with other dogs. And that's how immunity actually functions. In nature, those pups would actually be protected while they're socializing, and the immune system is learning how to produce its own antibodies, right? So it's the no socialization until 16 weeks is a really counterproductive and damaging approach to raising puppies, I think.
Yeah, I'd agree. And there is that whole protocol that was developed by someone in the States about immunisation by natural exposure to low levels of the disease in the environment. Yeah, so in the States, I think that person said you take the puppy to a really busy dog park when they're 8 weeks old and put them on the ground for 5 minutes, and then do that every week, and they were measuring and seeing seroconversion with the antibody levels coming up, which is really, really interesting. And I'd never thought of measuring the puppy's antibodies before vaccinating at 8 weeks old, so that has lit up a big light bulb for me of going, oh yeah. We could teeter test at
Yeah,
8 and 10 and 12 and 14 weeks and then just vaccinate when the maternal antibodies get to a low enough level that you need to vaccinate. I never thought of that possible approach before, and that's really fascinating for me. Thank you.
well, you're welcome. It's, it just, I don't know, it just kind of makes sense. And there's another approach, and I know that someone in the States, I can't remember exactly the company's name, but I can find out. They have been measuring the levels of antibodies in the pregnant mothers, and they were able to estimate how long the antibodies in those pups will last. So
Yeah.
they actually would schedule the vaccination at the time when the antibodies are about to expire. But I do think that when we challenge our pups that are protected by maternal antibodies throughout their early stages, they actually develop acquired immunity, meaning that they actually develop their own antibodies. And that's how the natural immunity should function and work, that there's basically an overlap of the immunity. And I think that giving vaccines to dogs that have an immature immune system is actually counterproductive. And as I said, if we give the vaccine, it actually can neutralize, it can bind to the antibodies in the bloodstream and it will neutralize them, right? So giving early vaccines actually may ironically make puppies less protected than if they were not given the early vaccine. I sometimes cringe when I hear that dogs get or puppies get vaccines at the age of 6 to 8 weeks, or I would not really consider any vaccination before 12 weeks. That would
Okay.
not be in my.
That's
So
that's
I
really
know it's
interesting, and
non-traditional and it's a little gutsy, but it's worked for 20 years, 20 plus years.
that's really interesting. And then we run into this really other big problem of the breed associations and the associations for people who breed dogs. They're not allowed to send a puppy to anyone without vaccinating them first. They have rules about this, and that is a real big barrier to being able to actually implement this, because it's mad. And I absolutely agree with if you give a vaccine to an immature immune system, it's not necessarily going to respond in a healthy way to it. Another thing that I was thinking about that is if you've got protective levels of antibodies in the body, whether they be maternal or from natural exposure or from a vaccination, giving a vaccination in that context is just an opportunity to injure your animal. The vaccine is the antibodies grab the vaccine before the body can mount an immune response to it, a healthy immune response. The antigen, I should say, because it could be a vaccine antigen or natural exposure or whatever. So you're just having an opportunity to injure the animal. It's not doing anything. You're giving it a biological medicine that has got well-documented side effects that can cause harm, that can't do any good and can only cause problems, right? And this is another thing that I get really frustrated by. I mean, I work in a clinic now that our go-to is that we titter test every animal before any revaccination. We offer that, and we encourage people to do that. I just can't understand why this isn't the gold standard for the whole profession, right? It does my head
uh, you know, I learned not to get into the marketing and politics of dog vaccines. But I do know one thing, that if the vaccines are given early to any immune system that is immature, it's like letting a 6-year-old cook a dinner right at the gas stove. Like, it's going to end up with a disaster. And it is actually like that. We're expecting, and plus there's another problem, that we give actually about 20 plus antigens or vaccines against certain diseases within a time frame of 8 weeks, which is not a natural situation. There would be no puppy that would have to go through a challenge of 20 plus diseases in 2 months. That's just not normal. And the immune system does two things. Either it learns to overreact because it's so overwhelmed, or
Mm-hmm.
it goes into a depression. And one of the results are allergies, and the other one is immune system depression, where you start seeing really serious problems, or even cancer in early stages of life, or you have autoimmune diseases where the body starts attacking its own cells, right? Whether it's anemia, hemolytic anemia, or platelet count drops down. There's so many issues that can be attributed to diseased immune system, and I think that the immune system is not built for that level of stress and response.
Yeah.
So there are a lot of things that need to be thought through, and I'm not necessarily saying that all vaccines are bad or all vaccines are good, but I'm just saying we need to be very mindful how we handle it, and definitely the patient should be always in the center of our the interests of the patients are the most important part. It is not the commercial value of the vaccine sale and transaction. It is not what the veterinarian thinks. It should be always about the puppy, about the dog. And
Yeah.
I personally do not vaccinate dogs that are older than 1 year, because I've never seen actually those diseases happen in dogs older than 1 year. It may happen in some sort of area that is a problem, but you know,
Okay.
I'm
Yeah,
pretty,
and
yeah, I'm
yeah, then I suppose you have to talk about risk benefit, because I have seen mature dogs get full blown parvo in Townsville where I used to work, and this is a situation where these
Mhm,
dogs had been living
mhm,
out on a farm, totally isolated, and they
mhm,
come into the city
mhm.
where there was a population
Absolutely.
of dogs with the disease, and they died from the disease. Some of these dogs died from the disease. So I think if they haven't had any exposure and they're going into a risky situation, then older than one. But most of the dogs that we teeter test, we don't need to revaccinate. It's pretty uncommon, really, that we need to revaccinate these dogs for the C3 parvo distemper canine hepatitis. And canine hepatitis, I've never seen a case of that ever in my career. Distemper, I think I might have seen 2 dogs in Australia in 20 odd years of practice that might have had distemper. So they're very rare diseases, right? Some of these diseases, because vaccination has been so broad spread.
I agree with you 100%. And it's interesting that you're saying that you've seen dogs that are on the farm and isolated from other dogs ending up with an infectious disease, because that's the only time I have actually seen that happen in a dog that was even over 6 months. And I think that there's a lot to say about the importance of socialization and the immune system remembering and being repeatedly kind of challenged and reminded that, hey, this is the virus that you should be creating antibodies against, right?
Yeah.
So socialization in a healthy way is super important, and I would think that that's part of the health plan, right, for everyone.
Yeah, and we were talking a little bit about behaviour issues and anxiety, and there's a massive epidemic of anxiety. I see more and more animals with anxiety issues, and I'd be
Hmm.
curious to hear from you what your thoughts are on. I mean, we've talked a little bit about it. I think one is that we're restraining these dogs, whether they're on a lead, whether they're locked in a yard, they don't ever get a chance to interact with these situations, and then they don't have the resilience to be able to deal with it. I think another thing that happens there too is that they can't move away from stimuli that they perceive as fearful, right? So if they're locked in the yard, they can't
Hmm.
move. If they're on the lead, they can't.
Hmm.
They feel like they can't escape from something that might be fearful
Hmm.
or dangerous for them. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't really. It's very complicated. It's very complicated. We did put our dogs in, or we put dogs into very unnatural environments. They like to roam, be free, explore, and sniff. And we also have exposed them to a lot of stressors that we know are damaging to us humans, and we have put our dogs into the same situation. And the connection, I think the dogs are kind of like the canaries in the coal mine about what is happening to people, because many people are quite internal and introverted, or they do not express what is going on in their head, what is going on in their life. And our dogs basically come to us with the message, hey, you have to, this is what you have to pay attention to, or you're anxious right now, or you're afraid. Like I must say that the two dogs that I've lived with and have had the privilege and pleasure to live with, Sky and Pax, are completely different. And they had very much, they displayed behavior that was very much similar to mine. When I had Sky, I was working in the very busy holistic practice, and quite often I was overwhelmed because it was super busy. And what my dog would be doing, he would be standing at the door and sometimes guarding the office and preventing some of the dogs coming in. And he was a nice and friendly dog, but he tried to control the environment, so it's not, and it was very sensitive to how I felt every day. And then I have Pax, who I call my bohemian, because he is smart and he knows what to do, but what he loves to do is to be free and connect with people and have little mini conversations, in quotes, with dogs.
Yep, yep.
And I love that kind of freedom now, and I love to decide who I'm seeing and who I'm not seeing, and keep my space, but also love to be with my family and friends and dog lovers, and talking to people, and so he reflects that. So it really, I'm not necessarily saying that every behavioral problem that our dogs have we should be blamed for, because there is the previous period where before we adopt them that actually plays a role as well. Also genetics, who knows? But I think it's always good to be mindful about how we contribute to our dog's anxiety. And aggression is actually one of the very specific areas of dog behavior that often has links to us. I had one time, is it okay if I tell you a story?
Yeah, absolutely. We love stories on this show, of course.
I still hold many of my clients in very close to heart, and we've become friends over the years. And I'm no longer in clinical practice, but when I was practicing, quite often I would actually, I would practice homeopathy as well, which addresses behavior. So sometimes I would just need to know how these dogs act and behave. So one of the dogs, her name was Ali. She was